Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bayworks webinar on the digital worker, using digital tools to deliver water services. Today, we will be discussing factors that impact the use of digital tools at water utilities. My name is Catherine Curtis, and I am the president of Baywork. Thank you for joining us today. Next. Here's our agenda today, and we will hear from these speakers on these topics. Then we will have a question and answer segment, and I will then conclude the webinar. Next. We really want to engage with you today, so please use the chat feature to share your thoughts. There's an icon at the bottom of your screen labeled chat. I'm sure you've all used this feature before. Next. Also, there's another icon at the bottom of your screen labeled QA for question and answer. Please use it to ask any question as we go along. Robert Scott, our Vice President of Baywork, will be moderating the question and answer segment, and he will be collecting these questions as we go along. I'd like to start off with a survey question, and you can type your answer in the chat. We will use this information as we continue to work on this topic moving forward. What is your issue or key problem you have observed in terms of your workforce using digital tools? I'll give you a little time to type in your response. What is your issue or key problem you have observed in terms of your workforce using digital tools? Okay, let's go to the next, and people can continue to input their answer as we move forward. For those of you who are new to Baywork, Baywork is a consortium of water and wastewater agencies and key stakeholders with a shared commitment to workforce reliability. You can go to our website at baywork.org and learn all about our signatory agencies. You can access our newsletters, our job posting page, our training map, and so much more. Next. From the very beginning, we have used this roadmap of these 4 objectives to do everything that we do. Our events, our papers, everything we do falls into these 4 categories. 1, develop qualified candidates for our mission critical jobs, which we'll cover in a moment. 2, provide staff with the information they need to do quality, reliable work. 3, modify work to optimize the use of our staff available. And 4, maximize cost effectiveness through investments and collaborate with others. Next. So these are our mission critical occupations. This was determined early on in a survey, all except for the engineer, which we added a couple years later. And if you'll notice, they're mostly tradespeople. Tradespeople need to know digital tools too, like work order systems and DCS and SCADA systems and SharePoint and other things. Next. So the purpose of this digital work program, this work paper, is to help the water and wastewater utilities make more effective use of digital tools. This is an area for change for many utilities, and it is a change management culture change effort. Next. So Bayworks Digital Worker Initiative began in 2019 when we first did a survey with our signatory membership. After that, we facilitated a workshop at the Transformative Issues Symposium back in DC. And then in January, we decided to do a deeper dive, and we focused on a large, medium, and small size signatory agency where we gathered more information and got more detail. In February of 2020, we went to the Utility Management Conference and facilitated a full-day workshop on the digital worker, where we had panelists and we had tables of discussion groups after each panel, and we collected more information on digital tools and digital workers. And then in October, we formed a national advisory group to help us with the white paper. So the advisory group is composed of 33 members from across the United States and Canada. 14 of those representatives are from water and wastewater utilities, including Baywork signatories, operations staff, informational technology experts, maintenance staff, even general managers. And then 7 representatives were from professional associations and community-based organizations. In our white paper, we have a listing of all the people that contributed and were on our advisory committee. And then we had 12 consultants who were, and still are, subject matter experts for digital tools. Next. So for the Baywork Digital White Paper Timeline, we did have our kickoff meeting in October. We sent out input forms that all the advisory group members filled out, and we had discussions later on that content. The draft white paper went out in February, so we had a pretty long review process from February to the end of May for the white paper review. And I would like to point out that we did have 2 discussion of possible next step sessions with our advisory board, which Cheryl Davis will be presenting later in this webinar. And then the white paper is up on our website at baywork.org, and it was released early this week. Next. So this is the table of contents in the white paper. A lot of this came from the Utility Management Conference, but also the advisory committee did advise us to add cybersecurity and a glossary of terms in the paper. Next. So that concludes my introduction and the background. And now I would like to introduce Mary Reynolds, who is a maintenance planner at Central Contra Costa Sanitary District.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction. I will be speaking about a challenge, an example, and also a lesson learned for the selection of digital tools. So in the beginning, the selection committee is typically driven by higher level employees, which include managers, engineers, IT professionals, or consultants. And these employees or consultants may or may not be familiar with the job functions of those that use the software daily. So by the time that these daily users are brought up to speed, the selection has been made and these end users are hopeful that the software chosen is going to fulfill their current wants and needs. Lack of support from the consultant, this could be either time constraints, monetary constraints, or just a lack of overall interest, makes it difficult to get issues or concerns that may arise during implementation handled in a timely manner, if ever at all. Next slide, please. So an example, I am the maintenance planner for Central San. That's a photo of my collection system group there. CityWorks was selected for us and committed at a very early point in the digital selection process. So we didn't have a chance to compare other software options, and we were given all of our preliminary information secondhand. So as a result, we had an idea of what some of the processes would be, but not an actual, it wasn't based on facts, basically. It was kind of the water cooler method where ideas and ideas of what we would get kind of floated around, but it wasn't the reality. So we were under the impression that processes would be a bit more automated, kind of like a touch and go type deal, or that there would be less input for the field crews, which would provide less room for error. And that wasn't what we ended up with. Our field crews didn't fully understand what their functions would be. As the maintenance planner, I didn't fully understand how many data checks would be required just to keep the integrity of the data. So an all hands meeting in the beginning of the digital selection process could have avoided these misunderstandings. It could have avoided lofty expectations, us feeling like we were getting a software that may solve all of our problems instead of, just the majority. And also it would have allowed each group to see how their job functions would change, because we really didn't understand how much change was going to happen with switching over to this digital tool. And then it would have allowed different perspectives and questions. So next slide, please. So the lesson learned in this, from the beginning, it would be great to involve everyone in the end user group, including IT staff, so that they can bring their perspective. This will allow everyone involved a voice. It will give them a voice in the project, and also increase engagement, accountability, and ownership. Getting everyone involved in the beginning literally gives everyone, it helps everyone to buy in. Allowing all the employees to feel that they're a valuable part of the team and that their knowledge and opinions matter, because they do. Everyone brings a certain aspect to this process, and you want to make sure that their voices are heard. You'll need everyone to buy in anyway. So if you have all staff to be active participants once the implementation begins, the whole process it goes a lot smoother. If you think of all your employees as a unique piece of a puzzle, you need everyone in their place in order to get the finished product. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Next, we will hear from Ken Salmon, who's the IT Director and Chief Information Officer for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. And he's going to talk to us about information technology support.
Thank you, Catherine. And my brief talk is very similar to Mary's, and I think they kind of complement each other. So I'm looking at a quote from the white paper that says, often the central IT function insists that no resources beyond the central IT group should be used. That's a very interesting statement, and it's usually true. It's especially true for setting up servers and writing software and patching systems, that sort of thing. But I want to talk about requirements today, the requirements process for choosing or building digital tools, because that's all important to getting the right tools, and especially what we need them to do. A lot of times someone will come into our business application manager's office and say, I need SharePoint. And he'll always say, what business problem are you trying to solve? What are your requirements? And requirements are really hard. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So next, please. Okay, thanks. So initially, when we're going out to look for a digital system, they should know, who's ever asking for it, why they want the system, and high level what they wanted to do. And that's mostly, I think, on business staff's shoulders. But it is a combination of IT supporting the business and business supporting IT to work through it. So I do want to say that business analysts is an exception to that statement that was in the white paper about the central IT group wants everything in IT. Business analysts could be on the business side or the IT side or both. They usually are on both. And certainly, as Mary said, IT needs to be involved in developing the requirements. But like I said, that could be on both sides. I think another example is people who create reports. They could be in IT or in the business. Every group I've ever been part of, there's always been a mix. Some business staff are so expert at the data and writing reports, they don't need IT's help, and some do. So here are some considerations for requirements that they should make sense. They should be actionable, something that actually could be done. And they need to be prioritized, because if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. And we should look at internal solutions. Maybe we already have a solution for this. Maybe the requester didn't know that. One thing I always struggle with is, should we choose the best of breed system or a system that integrates with our current solution set that's there? Because sometimes that's a better solution than getting the very best, say, best of breed system that may have a lot of overlap with other systems and different, they call the data points different things, and you need a lot of integration and interfacing work. One process that I really love for requirements and for developing a system, or even selecting an off-the-shelf system, is the agile method, where the business and IT get together, then they talk about some of the requirements, and IT goes away for a couple of weeks and comes back and shows them things so that they can critique and add more requirements, so they could either iterate or incrementally build or put together the system or configure it. Another consideration is, if we're thinking about a new system, we should also think about a new process. Watch out for implementing the same old process with a new system. By the way, systems don't magically solve anything. It's people, process, and systems. So there's a lot more work to do than just the system. It's very hard to develop the requirements. So one thing that's helpful is to look at what's available on the market or what other people have, to get ideas of what might be valuable to your agency. So, so for someone to just sit down and develop all the requirements for a full system, that's not typical. It's sort of a process. And if you find a system that you could buy off the shelf that doesn't exactly meet the process you want, but you could adapt your process to the system, you could find that you'll get a great deal, and you'll find benefits going down in the future with upgrading and staying standard with the system and getting all the benefits that the vendor is putting into that system. Next slide. Next slide coming up. Oh, thank you. Whoops. Go back one. Thank you. So I want to talk about how to be successful with projects and collaborate with IT. So again, the importance of requirements, I can't overstate that. Knowing what the system needs to do, even if it's an iterative process, is so important to how fast the system will be developed or delivered or configured. And there's, of course, the schedule and the cost benefits from that. Remember, it's the what, not the how. Don't tell us what system you want, tell us what you want to do, and let's work together on that. Make sure you do reconsider the process. So there's a little bit of a summary. The other thing I want to mention is that requirements will change during the requirements process and during the system build and after. So that's just normal. Don't think of it as some sort of failure. And I want to give two quick examples of requirements. Sometimes it's actually easy to develop requirements. I think a learning management system is easy to develop requirements for. A system that manages to say the mandatory courses we have to take. I don't think it's hard to know what that system needs to do, but I think it's very hard to maintain the data in those systems. You have to make sure you know who reports to who, and what are definitely the required courses for them, and did they take them or not. So there's a lot of data management on those systems, but they're very standard in the functions they do. So not hard to figure out what they should do. It's a hard system to manage. And I think Mary brought up a maintenance management system. That's a hard system to develop requirements for, because in our agency we have water, power, and sewer, and so there's going to be different thoughts on how to name assets, how to figure out condition assessment. Do we want the control systems to feed the maintenance management system, automatically generate work orders to fix assets that are in trouble, that sort of thing. So I'm going to end on that, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ken. Next, June Lopez, who is the general manager for Moulton Niguel Water District, will be talking to us about organizational culture.
Thanks, Kathy. And I just want to thank everyone at Baywork for making this white paper happen, getting all of us involved. It's been a privilege and an honor for me to be part of this group. And welcome to everybody that's out there. Can't see you, but look forward to seeing you in person one of these days. Hopefully everyone's doing well. So we're talking a little bit about the organizational culture, and you see the title as a difference maker, because it is important. There's a lot of different ways to define culture, but the way that I define it is how the people of the organization or group, how they feel and what they believe. Because leadership, culture, and change all go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. Have you seen a group or an organization that has a poor leadership, but people are excited and they're innovating? No, you don't see that. So those are very interconnected requirements in order to have any kind of change. And also to accept the fact that change is constant. Change is healthy, change is life. If nothing changed, that means you're pretty much dead. So change is actually a wonderful opportunity to improve and grow. So some of the challenges that you see on the screen there, again, you can summarize it that you got to have the leadership, you have to have the right culture in order to affect change. And leadership starts with people. And ideally, you want the head of the organization to be someone that can create a healthy, thriving culture. But this can also happen in groups. That's why I say leadership exists in all parts of the organization at all different levels. But ideally, in order to have an organization that is really embracing innovation, it does really mean a lot to have somebody at the top and also throughout who understand the importance of culture and affecting change. Next slide, please. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to tell you two stories, a tale of two stories, one that went well and one that didn't. So let's start with the bad one. I've been at the district now about 9 years. When I first started, literally my first week on the job, I walk in and nobody's smiling. So I walk into this area and I realize that there's all these balloons and candies and all these ornaments. And I'm like, well, this looks happy, but yet no one was smiling. Because see, right then and there was the first week that enterprise resource planning system was launched. And I thought, well, people seem excited by the decoration, but no one was smiling. And I come to find out that the person that was in the lead of that project was on vacation the week that it launched. And throughout the process and identifying the need and the tools, as Mary and Ken so articulately said in their presentation, they weren't consulted. So nobody knew what was going on. No one cared. That was a problem. No one cared. No one took ownership. They said, well, I wasn't part of it. No one asked me. I don't know what this is. It's just making my life more complicated. And so that right there set us up for failure. So one of the first things that I did was gather everybody to understand what didn't happen, what went wrong, so we can start fixing it. But I also said, this is something we have to do, because we had this legacy system that was called the golf system, and it was named after the person who designed it. And he and one other employee in the organization were the only people that could maintain and update this tool. So that's not good when you have your payroll, you have all your accounting issues, all on this legacy platform. So we had to explain why we were doing this. So we reset. I put different teams together with different people from different levels of the organization. I even brought people from the outside. And by the way, my board of directors that are publicly elected, they were also very frustrated. So this frustration was throughout the organization, but we had to reset, bring the right people to get this done, do some level of redo, create different teams, do different types of testing. And in the end, we got it right. But had we done from the beginning, as Mary said, had we done those things, had we done the all hands, had we gotten the right people together, we could have avoided all that. So we took those lessons learned for advanced meter infrastructure, AMI, the smart meters. So several years ago, we realized that our customers at the height of the historic drought in California wanted real-time information. So how can we accommodate that? And we talked to meter reader, level 1 meter reader. We talked to managers. We put a group together and said, what is it that we see as a need? And once we realized that there was a lot of value there, we also had to assure people and the labor union that this won't replace bodies, because I still need people to check meters. I still need people to deal with all the data that's coming in through AMI. I need to have different skill sets that's actually a little higher, so there could be higher pay for those positions. And we're going to evolve. Our meter readers have additional skill sets and be much more integrated and cross-trained with all the different parts of the departments that have to deal with this. Because with this meter, we also did customer portal. So that also elevated our customer account reps, our customer service, because they had to learn new skill sets. But we made it fun because we got them involved. We allowed them to pick the tools. We allowed them to research, talk to other agencies that launched similar efforts and didn't have such a successful outcome. We learned from their mistakes. We did due diligence. We did a lot of testing, and we made sure that everybody was on the same page. And that turned out to be one of our best stories, because particularly during 2020 with the pandemic, when we were all separated, it allowed us to be seamless in our customer service. It allowed us to be very connected in all the ways that we were engaging with our communities and our customers. So it was a very successful story, because again, there were a lot of stories that didn't go well with this kind of rollout. And again, this is why it's important to really do a lot of research, get a lot of people involved. All the steps that you take at the outset will set you up for success. So next slide, please. And in conclusion, the lessons learned: clarity. You have to have clarity. You have to first set the message about why you are doing what you're doing. And then you have to have clarity in the problem or the need or the gap and how you're looking to fill it. You have to have clarity in who you involve, because they need to understand. It's not just me as a general manager. It doesn't matter really what I understand, because I'm not the one that's doing the actual work. Everybody involved, anyone who is affected by, which typically is everyone. Sometimes people think if it's a finance system, it's just finance. No, it's not. Everyone benefits from that. Everyone is affected by that. Your engineering operations, they can't do anything if the system goes down in finance. If payroll goes down, nobody gets paid. That shuts everything down. So everything is connected. And so having that clarity is important. Then consistency of the process, how you do things. There is no favoritism. There's not about certain people are privileged to be involved. It's not just the managers. You got to get the people at all levels involved and have the consistency in how you roll out ideas, how you affect change, how you just do business and consistency. Because if I say one thing and do something else, I lose all credibility and trust of my employees. And communication, you cannot over communicate enough, because people need to understand. I don't just want you to understand what you do. I want you to understand how what you do affects everybody else, and what they do affects you. Because again, we all work on the same team. And accountability is important, because every now and then, maybe a little bit more frequent than we like to think, not everybody gets on this program, this train of thought. If they can't embrace the importance of helping one another and setting each other up for success, then there's got to be accountability from discipline to determination, because you've got to get the right people together to have the right consistent process to have a successful outcome. And evolving leadership, we all have to evolve ourselves, because we're always learning. The world is changing super fast. And I know you're going to hear from Dan later about cybersecurity issues. He made me realize just how little I knew in that area, and the vulnerability and the risk. And so that's really important to understand. I have to evolve if I'm going to make sure that the organization needs to evolve. And the last thing is this: be a hero. You see that little character? That's one of the cartoons that one of our employees drew. Honesty, effort, respect, one team. It is that simple. It's not that difficult. You just have to have the right heart and the right mind. You always have to be honest with your intentions and what you do, whether you made a mistake or not. You got to give me your 110%, not perfection. You always have to be respectful of one another. And you got to keep in mind, this is about team, not about you. It's about the others. So I thank you for your time, and hopefully it all made sense. I welcome your feedback and even pushback if you don't agree. Thank you.
That was great, June. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Sharon Peters, who's the president and CEO of EMA Incorporated, and she's going to talk to us about coordination with existing workflows and systems.
Thank you, Catherine, and hello, everybody. And what great speakers. I just can't wait to get my part over with and listen to everybody else. Thank you for the opportunity to share a story with you today. I'm going to talk about coordinating your digital tools with existing workflows and systems. As the opening to this chapter of the Baywork White Paper states, one of the greatest challenges to using existing systems and implementing new ones is the tangled mass of manual and digital systems that utilities already have in place. What you don't know going in can cause you problems starting projects, problems along the way, and problems achieving your goals in the end. The good news is, just by realizing you're part of a tangled mass that already exists, you've taken a big step towards success. Most implementations of digital tools come along with big expectations for change. After all, if there's no expectation of improvement, why do a project at all? But it's very difficult to change successfully unless the people who are going to use the system or tool have an awareness of the need to change and a desire to change. And it's very difficult to build those needs and desires without a shared sense of where you are today. So no matter how big or how small your utility is, there's some key questions you can ask yourself and others to start your planning off on the road to success. What systems and tools already exist? What are the opportunities to get more value out of what you already have? How is work done today? What's working well? What kinds of things does everybody complain about? Is there duplication, fragmentation, gaps, or black holes where things get lost? Knowledge hoarding? How much change will there be if people have a new system or tool to use, and who will be affected? Next slide, please. I want to tell you a story about a real utility that I know that has struggled for years with how to build support for technologies that different groups have wanted to implement. It's a mid-sized utility that's part of a city, so they experience all of the challenges of competing for attention and resources with higher profile departments. Their story really starts over 20 years ago when they made some big investments in core technologies like a SCADA system, computerized maintenance management system, and a highly tailored customer service and billing system. Along with the new systems, they developed an internal group exclusively responsible for sustaining those technologies over time. The city fell on hard times during the Great Recession and afterwards. Some significant industries left the area. The utility now has more capacity to supply water than it needs, which causes it other problems. It's under a lot of pressure to reduce costs, and its technologies are way out of date. A few years ago, its technology support resources were centralized into a single department serving the whole city, and they lost focus on the utility specific systems and data. And after that, the city implemented a buyout program that induced a lot of experienced staff in both the utility and IT to retire. Great. Different groups within the utility have been trying to update their technologies by proposing to replace one system at a time. Each system is likely to be very expensive, and one by one, their proposals have been turned down. At the same time, staff are trying to get their work done, and they've developed multiple workarounds using the tools that they have and created many different versions of the truth. A few years ago, a policy analyst working in the utility director's office came up with the idea of trying to pull all the needs together into a single business-oriented technology plan with prioritized projects extending over a longer period of time. They started by identifying which systems and tools the utility was using belonged to the city and were used by other departments as well. After that, they grouped the utility specific systems. Then they created a map of basically the diagram shown on the slide to link the systems and data to the stakeholders and the outcomes across both the city and the utility. You know, this diagram shown here is one that likely only makes sense and is loved by the people that put it together. But that's really the point, that it makes sense to them and helps them plan what they need to do next and who needs to be involved to be successful. And using this approach, they were able to gain support and funding for their overall plan by working together. Next slide, please. So what are some of the lessons that you can learn from their experiences? Well, I've kind of grouped them into two groups. If your role is within the utility itself, first and foremost, remember you're part of that ecosystem. What you want to do is important, but it won't succeed in the end if it causes problems for someone else. Get together with like-minded people and draw a picture together. What does success look like for you? What does the future look like? Be clear about your outcomes. What are you hoping to accomplish and why. Make your initial efforts as simple as possible and no simpler. There are a lot of different opinions about whether to design up front or pilot small and expand. But in both cases, just as Ken said, the experienced guy, be as flexible as you can because you don't know what you don't know when you start. Make your project just right sized, not too big and not too small. Think about how much change your group can accommodate. Remind yourself that it may not feel like it, but there always will be a next phase, and incremental improvement is worth it. Identify as many challenges as you can up front. Ask people about what has not worked before and why. And slow is fast sometimes, especially at the beginning. Take the time to plan and replan if you need to. If your role is in an IT department, use your governance processes for good. Listen for what is really holding people back from using technology well. What could you change to be more effective? What could they change? Build and sustain an enterprise-wide architecture. You're in a position to be able to see the whole map. Others may only be able to see what's close to them around them. Understand the utility's business purposes, what it's trying to accomplish as best you can. Help illustrate the data flows through the organization so that people can understand if they're one small part of a workflow, where does it go after that? And what are they dependent on before? Listen for who is affected by new technology and communicate as much as you can. Thank you for the opportunity to share this story with you. I hope the insights collected together in the white paper will help you with your digital journey.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Next up, we have Cindy Goodburn, who's an independent consultant from Cindy Goodburn Consulting, LLC, and she's going to talk to us about human resource issues.
Thank you, Catherine, and good morning, everyone. Appreciate everyone being here. This is really a hot topic. And what I really want to cover today is human resources partnerships. Our challenge is that human resources positions are generally held by staff with knowledge on how their organization handles general HR functions. They're really limited in understanding the knowledge and skills needed to perform water utility functions. And often they take a cookie cutter approach to job classification, compensation, job descriptions, and they fall back on their comparative norms, which may be things such as other municipalities, or even looking inward at their IT department without using any other resources. So I worked for an organization that I think was Sharon Peters was describing, exactly that same kind of large organization, wastewater treatment plant, managed by a small city. But I had developed a relationship with our HR partner, which grew over the course of 5 or 6 years. And he was willing to work with me and learn more about job requirements for our operators and for the soon-to-be positions of SCADA administrator and instrumentation and control specialist. I did a lot of research for him, and we worked together to develop good job descriptions, and about the best we could get was okay pay lines. Then he left. So we got a new HR partner, and she reportedly had experience from her previous job working with being the HR liaison, working with the water and wastewater facilities under that city that she came from. Next, please. So I was getting ready to request a salary survey for an instrumentation and control specialist in advance of a recruitment effort. So I thought I'd do an educational meeting with our new partner. I prepared a really nice PowerPoint and planned for a tour to our digesters to look at the networks and open up the area control panels and check out the PLCs and get a visual description of what everything did and what the responsibilities of this position were. The meeting went well, and she thanked me. oh, I just wanted to mention, so this was actually the first slide I started out with her to just kind of show a visual representation of our field devices, our control devices, and those were the two areas we were focused on for this position. And so this position was going to be managing actually 2/3 of our entire system. So she thanked me and went along her way. And next slide, please. A week later, she called me and she had great news. She had found the perfect pay line match in the IT department with the city. We probably wouldn't need to go outside the organization for a survey. And I said hesitantly, great, so what's the comp? Hit the button once, Michael. And she said, it's the desktop support technician. So all that time I had spent trying to educate someone that I thought was already educated was really an epic fail. So the lessons I learned are, don't assume that the HR liaisons understand the knowledge and skills required to support your water utility. These are not business network skills or desktop support. Next. And I think the important thing here is to really take responsibility for arming yourself with an arsenal of job skills, job descriptions, pay information, and research so that you can bring that back to your HR partners and really educate them. This is going to help you when you're trying to create job descriptions or justify appropriate pay lines and get the talent that you really need. And it also saves HR a lot of time because a lot of times they don't really know where to look to find comparable information. And of course, it's at our fingertips. Also, I wanted to say that this can also lead to other really great partnerships that can help you out. One of the most valuable resources that I had was I developed relationships with other water and wastewater utilities that had similar systems. And I could pick up the phone and call them and get a pay line or a job description or anything I needed through these partnerships. So I want to say partnership, 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 and make sure you arm yourself with what you're going to need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. That was great. And that's what Baywork is all about, partnerships. Okay, the next speaker will be Marianne Langridge, PhD. She is the CEO and founder of Sustainable Synthesis Limited, PBC, and she's going to talk to us about initial and ongoing staff training.
Thanks, Catherine. I think one of the things that's been so interesting to me listening to everybody else this morning is how I think all of our topics are very complementary. And, you know, I think it's important as you all listen to what I have to say to realize that everything everybody said before me impacts training. So, you know, from Mary's experience and making sure people are involved early, the users are involved early, Ken's discussion of prioritization and IT participation early, June's discussion of culture, Sharon talking about how, you know, about the ecosystem and making sure everybody understands how they fit into that ecosystem. And then, you know, Cindy's relationship building, it all kind of comes together when you talk about successful training. You know, one of the challenges that has been talked about in the white paper and just in general is making sure people are able to be effective. And some people, you know, when you look at generational differences and even just personality differences, some people love digital tools. I'm one of those weird people who just doesn't mind diving into something new. But I think we have to recognize everybody comes to it differently, and the role of those tools is different in everybody's job. So, I think that this is a challenge for so many organizations because we don't give people the time and the resources to learn. Everybody knows how strapped we all are, especially, with COVID, with budget constraints, with, everything that's going on in your quote unquote day job. To add to that, learning something new, taking away, the comfort of your routine and the efficiencies you've developed and replacing it with something that, you need a learning curve to get through. It's important that, you recognize that you need to give people the time to do this. So I think lack of time and a feeling of lack of support really contributes to people's unease with learning and with the training process. I mean, how many times have you ever heard someone say, "Oh, I can't wait to go to software training today"? It's just it's just not viewed as a very fun exercise. I think there's also a lot of focus in the training process on the tools themselves and the logistics, the keystrokes, what do you enter here? It doesn't really lend itself sometimes to that bigger picture and that ecosystem that Sharon referred to. And, I think as Mary highlighted, people aren't comfortable if they feel like something's being imposed on them that's unknown. So, all of those factors really, I think, contribute to the hesitation and discomfort with the training process. Next. So an example I'm going to talk about is the implementation of a new customer information and billing system. As was mentioned by June, that this system was being replaced because the legacy system was, written by one person who was about to retire, and it needed to be replaced for resiliency reasons. I mean, the CIS and billing is the financial, backbone of a utility. And what we did was we began to plant the seeds for training during software selection. So by taking a business process approach to looking for a new customer information and billing system, we did a lot of swim lane mapping. So we created pictures that showed everybody what the process was and where the tool fit into the process. And we had the end users help contribute to writing scripts. So this was, I'd call it a consultant facilitated process. It wasn't the consultant coming in and saying, here's the software selection, here's the requirements we've used in other places, they'll work for you too. It was, how can we describe what you do on a day-to-day basis? And if your process isn't working well, because a lot of that got vetted out during the process mapping exercises, how do you want your process to work? And we broke it down into some key categories. Those scripts really helped people understand the bigger picture context. And so we were planting the seeds for the role of software and the role of that tool as early as the software selection process. And then we used them throughout. Those same scripts were used during the testing. So, a typical software implementation timeline, testing is last, right? It's, you go live or you're just about to go live, and then you do your training. Here we really built it in, and we added detail obviously over the course of the process. But we had the scripts. We selected power users not based on their job title, but based on their affinity to wanting to participate and wanting to have a role. So we had people identified throughout who would eventually become the owners in the internal support and training, so that it wasn't always leaning back on the vendor or the consultant to train, but that the people had with them someone that they considered a peer who they could go to for help along the way. The partnership with the vendors and consultants was really important. It was almost like it was a team that didn't show boundaries, right? It didn't matter, what hat you were wearing or where your paycheck was coming from. This was an implementation team. Everybody did everything. I mean, there were cases where actually we had a vendor representative answering, customer calls because the person who was usually answered customer calls was in training. So, we made sure that we had coverage for people and they felt supported. And as I mentioned, that power users had a key role in support and ongoing training. Next. I think some of the important lessons learned, one is that training is part of every step of the project. All experiences are learning opportunities. And I think including early in the selection process, members from the IT department, HR business partners, if they can attend, people who are maybe impacted by the ultimate reports or decisions that get made with the data from that system, not necessarily just the end users, really having a broad representation early to develop those scripts to understand the context of the tool. And that means you're starting training day one of the project. And it makes it so much easier when you finally flip the switch and go live and turn the old system off to make sure people understand the big picture as well as, the keystrokes that are involved. I found that training is a place where you have to address trust head on. If you haven't developed that proper culture of trust throughout the project or in other areas of utility activities, it shows itself during training. You can tell when you've got the person with the glassy eyes just typing along and everybody's sitting silently listening to the trainer at the front of the room that you're missing something. So it's important that you develop a place where people can say that they're not comfortable with something. That when you're doing testing and you've got people, interacting with the system sometimes for the first time, that you realize that they're training, and if they're uncomfortable with something, you should be pulling out from them what they feel, what they like and what they don't like. Sometimes it's scary to ask someone after you've picked a system and you're months or sometimes even years into the implementation process to say, what's not working? What are you worried about? Because you don't want to mess up the project. But asking those kinds of questions doesn't mean that you're going to derail the project. It means that you're making sure people understand that they're heard, that their concerns are heard, and that you can address later on, okay, well, what do we do to make that person comfortable? How do we have to change our training? Maybe we need to tweak our process still without, derailing the process. Making sure that people can really speak up on in a safe way is very important. And I think it's important when you select your vendors and consultants to help with that, that you make sure they understand that importance as well. It's not just a check the box, yep, I've done the training, but it's, making it really part of the lifeblood of the project. For big projects, ERP kinds of projects where you're impacting almost everybody in the organization, it can be really helpful, especially if you sense that someone is very uncomfortable, to meet people one-on-one. It's one thing to call out in a meeting and say, does anybody have any questions or concerns? Not everyone's going to feel comfortable speaking up, but we've had projects where we've gone individually to people, not just the management tier, but individual end users, and asked them, what are you concerned about? What are you worried about? Sometimes the smallest comment can really add a lot to the value of the project and making sure that you address things thoroughly along the way. And it makes people feel recognized and respected and engaged. And that in and of itself, even if things don't turn out, they don't get their way, so to speak, at least they feel like they were heard and listened to. And you can provide to them, more one-on-one conversation to address their needs. I can't stress this enough. This is very much along the lines of the whole Bayworks model of collaborative utility support, but utilities need to own the training experience themselves, because there does need to be ongoing training. You can't sit in the room for a couple of hours or a couple of days and absorb everything that's going to be changing for you. So having those designated power users, making sure that there's people within the utility who can own that training experience and provide ongoing support when the vendors and the consultants leave, and taking advantage of broader groups. So if there's other utilities who are using the same software as you, participate in those user groups, go to those annual software conferences, because you really develop a broader support system to help supplement your own training and learn from what other people have done. And one other thing that I thought of and didn't get a chance to put on the slide is that takes time. You know, I kind of opened with that, and I want to close with that too. You need to recognize that people need to be given the time and the resources to conduct training and to participate in training, and to find some ways to do that, whether it's paid overtime, whether it's bringing in temps to take care of some simple tasks to offload some of the burden from people so that they could really focus and understand that the adoption of this tool is important. I highly recommend that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Elizabeth Toops will now talk to us. She's the director of the Utilities Training Programs from the Jewish Vocational Service organization, a key partner of Baywork, and she will be talking to us about developing qualified candidates for digital tools, digital jobs.
Thanks, Catherine, and thank you for the wonderful partnership that JVS and Baywork have established over the years. I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenge of the capacity of community colleges and union training programs to prepare candidates for these digital jobs, and how important it is that it depends on active partnership with the water industry. Some of the questions that this report did a really excellent job of responding to are, first of all, do candidates have the basic digital literacy skills? And then in some ways, even more importantly, do they demonstrate the ability to learn new and emerging technologies as they come online? Increasingly, we recognize that these basic digital literacy skills are as important as many of the other traditional basic skills that we think of when it comes to work. And so really in partnering with community colleges and other training programs, ensuring that that candidates really come to that training with some of those basic digital literacy skills is really critical. Secondly, are students exposed to cutting edge technology through on-site learning opportunities such as internship, pre-apprenticeship, and apprenticeship? Especially in the trades, we know that there's only so much value in the even high quality technical training that's delivered in a classroom if those students don't have access to the work environment, the kinds of tools and equipment that are being used at the water plant or water agency. And that certainly includes the technology as well. And one of the reasons for that is relates to these last 2 points, which is, do the instructors that at the community colleges or other training programs that you may be working with, do they have firsthand experience with technology that's currently in use and how those new technologies will impact the work in the future? Again, we want to make sure that the candidates that are coming to agencies for these critical jobs are coming with training that is been delivered by people who know water. Do they know what water and wastewater treatment agencies do? Do they know the context of the work? Do they know the context of the technology that's being used in that work? And similarly, do those local training vendors have access to current and cutting edge technology in use locally, such as SCADA and work order systems? And this is an important role that water and wastewater agencies play in their partnerships with community colleges, both the instructor support and the technology support. It's really important that agencies are investing in their local training vendors and ensuring that the students that they hope to hire one day have exposure to these really critical technologies and how they're being implemented, and again, how they're going to impact the work in the future. Next. I'll tell you a little bit of a story here about the BayWork and JVS partnership, and it's a regional instrumentation apprenticeship that we're launching as we speak. This partnership really sort of typifies the kind of work that JVS and BayWork do in the Bay Area with our local community college and union training programs. The problem is around this really critical role of instrumentation. There's a lack of high quality training capacity regionally. In the Bay Area, we have one community college that's recognized as a really high quality trainer in this work. It is also bought and paid for by the oil and gas industry. And so the training that it delivers is really geared towards that industry, as you might expect, and that industry actually hires the vast majority of the graduates. So this regional apprenticeship program was really all about, number one, is all about expanding that training capacity to be more regional in nature, and also ensure that the students that are in that one program are aware of the work that water and wastewater utilities do. So it's making sure that those students and our college partners know about the water and wastewater industry as another alternative for those highly skilled students coming out of that program. This is obviously critically important because these are there are going to be new skill demands that are due to the digitization of treatment plants. So this instrumentation work is going to be increasingly important as the industry moves towards more digitization. And the other issue is really about whether the current workforce is representative of local communities. And this is one place where BayWork and JVS have really developed a deep partnership, which is how do we identify people from communities that are underrepresented in the water and wastewater industry, people from communities of color, women, and others who have not had access to these great jobs that the industry offers to residents of our communities. So some of the solutions, some of the industry-based solutions that this apprenticeship is implementing is, number one, a multi-employer, multi-union, multi-college regional apprenticeship. And if you think that sounds complicated, it is. No doubt about it. But it's been really a true testament to the partnership. That word keeps coming up in this webinar today. True testament to the partnership of the folks that are working on this apprenticeship. Number two, relevant and contextualized curriculum. Again, as I mentioned before, our local the community college that we're partnering with initially is that same college that I talked about earlier that was really closely aligned with oil and gas. That college has been very open to feedback from our industry partners to say, these skills are more important in water and wastewater. These other core concepts that you're including in your curriculum are less important to us. Let's beef up this. Let's reduce that. So really making sure that the curriculum is contextualized to water and wastewater. More diverse workforce with digital literacy skills. And this in some places in some ways is where pre-apprenticeship and internship can play a really valuable role. There's a great potential for replication. Water in the Bay Area, the water and wastewater industry is not known for apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship That's certainly something that we're trying to change, and we think that this model, a regional model, is really worthy of replication. We're actually piloting some of this work in the Inland Empire in Southern California. So we're excited about that, the potential replication across the state and across the country. And finally, this work really would not be possible in many ways without leveraging public and private funding. And that's really where JVS has come in and brought both state and federal funding to the scene, and has really supported this work in so many ways. Next. Some lessons learned, two key lessons here. Strong and creative partnerships and financial investments are needed to develop the contextualized curriculum, and access to current and cutting edge technology in the classroom and or as part of on-site learning is really critical to the development of candidates who are highly qualified for these positions. And secondly, new digital skill requirements must be emphasized for training partners. And certainly digital literacy. One of the questions we're grappling with is how is digital literacy defined in the world of trades and other occupations that the industry relies on, and this notion of a demonstrated ability to learn new and emerging technologies is clearly something that we expect candidates for positions going forward to really possess. Thanks a lot to Baywork for putting on this great webinar, and to all the folks that worked on the report. Awesome job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Next, we have James P. Cooper, who is the Associate Vice President and Global Lead for Intelligent Water from Arcadis, and he's going to speak to us about artificial intelligence.
Excellent. Thanks, Catherine. So happy to talk about this topic, a little bit different than some of the topics we've talked about. If we can get to the first slide there, we can go through okay, so the challenge. So I'm going to talk about a topic that's sometimes thought of as a black box, right? Artificial intelligence. The water sector in general is slow to adopt technology. I'm not here to talk about why, but often all of us, right, all of the water sector people are really caught in a tyranny of the immediate. So when we talk about something that seems new and interesting, even though it could, really provide some potentially great benefits to us, we may not necessarily be focused on the topic just because we're caught in that responsive mode. And a lot of times I hear when I talk with the various utilities, things like, our bot's going to replace our jobs, or we don't have the time to look at this, maybe we'll look at it in the future. Are we going to rely on something that's a black box to provide safe drinking water, right? So there's a number of topics there. So I summarized that challenge. And a lot of the previous speakers, they were talking about training and needs for training. I guess I'd probably maybe even define that as a bit of a broader challenge, not necessarily training, but general understanding and our culture as an entire sector, not even in a specific organization, but as an entire water sector. We often are the ones that present the greatest headwinds to some of these, not necessarily any technology capability or integration across systems or anything like that. So, in the short time I have here, I certainly cannot provide the training on what is artificial intelligence or collective intelligence or machine learning, but I want to just peel back the layer just a tiny bit so you all can have an idea of what I'm talking about. And it's not an easy task. If you go on to the next, you'll see that this crazy graphic is the current vendors, or from 2020 vendors, of the AI landscape. So it's very easy to see this and be overwhelmed right? Where in the world do we turn? Do we look at platforms? Do we look at visualization? Do we look at, data integration and processing? It's a bit overwhelming, certainly. On to the next slide. So the story I'm going to tell, it is from a specific utility. I'm not going to name them, but if any of the folks that are attending are utilities that I've worked with, this has been a almost identical story for multiple utilities. So the utility leadership established funding to pilot and implement artificial intelligence, right? Leadership may have attended a conference or something and said, hey, there's some real potential there. There's a business case there. Let's set aside some budget in the next year to test these things out. They also established an internal champion to lead the effort. Again, one of the key components to successfully implementing this in my mind. They conducted initial visioning workshops. They looked at various roles within the utility, from HR to engineering to operations to customer service reps. What they found was that most staff were more interested in improving on the basics, improving on the systems they have, data management and integration, training for the systems that they have, rather than actually piloting some sort of new artificial intelligence, even though there was proven business case there and case studies showing the value and benefit to using that artificial intelligence. Further, within that utility and through those workshops, it was found that there's really various perceptions within the utility of what is artificial intelligence, right? What are those long-term impacts? Different quotes like I showed on the previous slide of, is this going to replace our job? Some suggested that the use of AI may increase their workload because now we're going to have another advanced technology, and that's another thing that we constantly have to maintain and update and monitor. And it may end up being more work to maintain that than benefit we get from using it. So in this utility, the internal champion really struggled to kind of define the next steps. As a result, got caught up in doing everything else they were doing, and it kind of just went downstream. The utility continued to operate as they always have, and really never realized the benefit of how AI could truly help them. It may sound like a great approach, right? If I were to present this story in a different way, something that most people agree with is that when you think of applying something like an advanced technology or digital technology, it's critical to focus on what the needs are, not necessarily what the shiny objects are and figuring out how they work for you, right? It's more critical to look internal and say, here's what our challenges are. Is there something that can help us? Well, this is exactly what this is doing. It's saying, let's spend some money on AI, but let's then figure out how we can use it, not the other way around. So it all surrounded on the basics of better understanding technology, better understanding the topic. If you go to the next one, very quickly here, I'll just give you an example. So our perception for something like machine learning is the image on the left, right? I think many times we think, oh, that's just this crazy thing, and certainly something that's going to happen in the future. The reality is what I show on the right. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but it is quite simple. We take data, fresh data, we apply a calculation to that. So that could be looking at where pipes broke in a system and running a calculation to identify where pipes may break over the next year based on that data. We get an outcome. So that's where those pipes might break. We evaluate that outcome. So in the next year, we say, did those pipes actually break or not? And then the computer says, okay, well, we need to improve our calculation. So we go ahead and do that and apply that to fresh data. That's machine learning. It's really quite simple. And yet our perception is it's this massive black box. So it's really about the understanding. So if I talk about lessons learned, on the next slide, I think there's a couple key things that we should focus on. While we use AI in our everyday personal lives, we really need to focus on education and understanding because it's still early in the water sector. We need to engage the workforce first. I think we've all been talking about that. Then once we understand everyone's role, we can look at how something like artificial intelligence might support them. Reliable data is required. Perfect data is not. If you wait for perfect data, you'll probably never implement something. And make sure that what you're doing is really there to enable or support roles within your organization, not replace them. I truly believe that the value of a person's time in a single day is so much more when they are enabled by AI rather than that replacing that person's role. That's not necessarily the case. I threw up a couple terms there. Those are some different definitions I have. Again, trying to help with the education. A lot of times people confuse machine learning for AI, or they think they're one and the same, and collective intelligence. Certainly, they're very different. If anyone has any questions, certainly happy to take those. Just to wrap up the topic here quickly on AI, I have a couple questions of when you look about applying advanced technology, what are some of those things we should evaluate? So does the technology provide a better outcome? What's your organizational maturity relative to innovation and change? Does the tool less complex than other tools that give you a same answer, right? Don't use AI if you can get a similar answer using a calculator. Can the technology be made transparent across the organization, and can the tool be adopted by the workforce? Again, all really important questions you need to answer anytime you're thinking about applying digital technologies to the workforce. With that, I thank you all, and we're on to the next presentation.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was really good. Next up, we have Dan Groves, who is the business sector lead for West Yost, and he's a subject matter expert on cybersecurity, and he's going to talk to us about that important topic.
Thank you, Catherine. So fair warning, I start a little bit of doom and gloom in the beginning here, but then we're hopefully going to bring it back to a positive angle. So it's really been great hearing all these presentations around how we're implementing, the digital worker, right, and all the digital tools that are available. But one stark reality that we have to deal with is cybersecurity is a challenge that is with us and is only growing day by day. So every digital system that we implement, we have a purpose of how it's supposed to work and how it's supposed to function and what it's going to do for us. There is unfortunately a community of folks out there that sometimes are more knowledgeable than us about those systems, and they know exactly how to turn out an output from that system that is exactly what we don't want. So we have to be aware of that. We have to think about that. And as the digital worker advances, we need to make sure we're cognizant of that to be able to reap the benefits of the digital improvements, but not really fall in the pitfalls. So there's three challenges really as it applies to the digital worker from cybersecurity. Is we have a continuously evolving cybersecurity threat specific to critical infrastructure that in the water wastewater sector, our digital workers are really going to be working with. Second, the digitization of everything. So in other words, it's becoming very difficult to buy equipment or components and systems that are not nearly, if not completely, digitized. We'll talk about that challenge in a little bit. And then finally, one of the things that we've seen is as automation and digitization of systems have come in, the more advanced you become, sometimes we're starting to see that some of the digital workers are actually losing touch with the physical aspects and how to actually run critical infrastructure. On the next slide, let's talk about some of those results. So all of us have seen this in the news, right? We've heard about JBS and a very, very large beef provider that literally had shut down all of their plants due to a cyber attack. So the physical production was halted and terminated based on that. You've heard about the Colonial Pipeline shutdown. Again, another ransomware attack against a large utility that basically had a massive impact across the entire East Coast from the perspective of being able to deliver fuel. And then, of course, one that's near and dear to us, unfortunately, is the recent attack against a very small facility in Oldsmar, Florida, that was a direct attack against the utility. We really don't know much about how it happened or why, but we definitely know that it's real to us. So these are the challenges that we're facing. Let's move to the next slide and start talking about the positive side. What is the benefit? So I'm going to talk a little bit about an organization called Idaho National Labs. You may have heard of them before, but quick background, they're funded by the Departments of Energy, Homeland Security, and Defense. Their background and their reason to exist is to really protect the nuclear and electric grid from a cybersecurity perspective. So these are the folks that, if you want to talk about critical infrastructure protection, these folks know it. And really their focus has been on really focusing how to protect these critical assets from cyber attacks for a long time. They actually operate what is called a water security test bed in Idaho, which is a very, very interesting project. You have an opportunity to learn more about that. And finally, they are also the originator of what is called CCE. I'll explain that a little bit later, but that's a methodology that we think is really where things are headed. So on the next slide, Idaho National Labs mantra is the following. And again, a little doom and gloom, but if you're critical infrastructure, you're going to be targeted. And if you are targeted by one of these actors, you will be compromised. Next slide, please. And the reason for this is that the folks that do this work, and I've had the opportunity to sit in Idaho across the table from folks who work for the United States government, who their job is to target critical infrastructure in other countries, right? So they know what they're talking about. Let's just put it that way. And these are very smart people. They have that. This is their job. And one of the folks that originated this CCE framework, he's passed on, but his name was Mike Asante, and he really made the point that cyber hygiene is helpful for warding off what he called online ankle biters. So in other words, cyber hygiene are all of the things that we've been doing from cybersecurity from this point forward, which is put in a firewall, patch that, update this, lock that down. That's all cyber hygiene, including many of the new fancy products that come out that say, you know, put in this product that's going to help your cybersecurity. Wonderful, we need to do that. But notice the second part. It really registers very as a speed bump for sophisticated actors that are after a particular target. So on the next slide, what we want to really cover is the fact that, look, there's been a lot of focus up till now on, you know, how do we reduce our risk? How do we assess our vulnerability? And all those things are important. You really absolutely need to do those. But if you take the risk equation at the bottom, where risk is the product of likelihood, vulnerability, and impact, what we're really seeing based on, you know, we've been saying this for a long time, but now it's becoming public understanding, is risk and likelihood are really something that we really can't control. It's constantly moving, it's constantly changing. And the more systems that we put in place, the more we increase those functions. So now what we're basically saying is risk is impact from a critical infrastructure perspective. In other words, what is the impact when these systems are compromised? The next slide will help us to kind of start thinking about the lessons learned. All right. So if we're going to be compromised, if we're going to be targeted, what are the biggest impacts that we need to think about, right? And what are the lessons learned from that? So first off, there's really three things that we need to think about very, very carefully, which are how do we design and operate critical infrastructure? How does it function? We need to think about how we do that in a way that's recognized as a cybersecurity challenge. Second, we need to have a very well-defined process on how we think about cyber risk, especially when we're addressing anything that has to do with cyber critical infrastructure. And then finally, we all want to enjoy the benefits, right, from digitization and the technology that's there, but we need to minimize the pitfalls of actually digitizing our critical infrastructure. So on the next slide, we talk about consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. This is the methodology that Idaho National Labs has developed to really help organizations understand and manage strategic cyber risks. And what I want to make sure I make clear is this is different from cyber hygiene of adding more firewalls and more things that we've been doing up to now. We need to keep doing those. But what we're talking about here is changing the way that engineers, operators, leaders, or the digital workers that we're talking about, how we understand and mitigate cyber risk for the most critical systems and those processes. So on the last slide, we'll just cover, I won't be able to get into it in detail, but I want to at least make you aware that there's the CCE process has several steps to it. And CCE is really consequence-driven, cyber-informed engineering. And one of the key elements of this is 4 different phases to be able to evaluate either an existing system on what are the consequences of a failure, what are the systems, which is phase 2, how do those systems work together, and then 3, what are the consequence-based targeting efforts you could go through. Essentially, what are the ways in which a focused organization could really put us out of business. And then finally, in the 4th phase, going back and putting in the mitigations and protections to stop that. And in a lot of ways, phase 4 is not about putting in more tools or more elements of security. In many ways, it has to do with putting in physical barriers and protections that actually take some of our most critical protections, our critical systems, completely off the table from a cyber perspective. This is an exciting development that I think is going to really help move the water sector forward. And one of the key things that I'm excited about is the fact that very shortly we're going to be working with AWWA to help take this CCE process and prepare it, and essentially prepare a process that'll be focused specifically on the water sector. Thank you for your time. And
Thank you, Dan. I know cybersecurity is an area I need to learn more about. Next up is Cheryl Davis with CKD Consulting, who will talk to us about the possible next steps in this area of work.
Thank you. When we began our white paper project, we had some topics that we were going to work on, and on all of those topics, we knew that we were going to be gathering information on challenges people were facing and their lessons learned. And we put that together, and that's in the text of the report that we've just now published. But during the process, it became clear we're working with brilliant people here. We're working with really well-informed people with a lot to offer. And while we're working with them in our advisory group, let's take this to another level and go ahead and gather their ideas on what are next steps that we could try to take together as an industry to address all of these challenges and learn from each other. So we had 2 brainstorming sessions with advisory group members and recorded their suggestions. So if you look at your report, you'll see that we have an attachment called Possible Next Steps. It's not at the level of a strategic plan, but it's an idea box. It's a box of ideas that came from some really well-informed people that I think will serve us very well in the future as we try to move forward together. And today's presentation will just be only a taste of the ideas that you'll see in that part of the report. Next. An overarching idea that we have, and I've written it here, is look for opportunities for water, wastewater, utility collaboration. But I want to rephrase that and say, let's create opportunities for water, wastewater, utility collaboration. We're the set of people that can do that. And that kind of collaboration could be everything from at a regional level, maybe one utility goes and looks at the tools that somebody else is using to handle a certain problem, or it could be something at the national level, an ongoing collaboration like WEF's WISE program. Next. As you have noticed from many of the prior presentations, utilities just really struggle with selecting digital tools. And one reason I think that they struggle with it is that their entire focus is on the tool itself. What will this tool do? And oftentimes what they don't look at carefully enough is, who are we? What are our capacities? What can we handle? And what about us is going to create an implementation challenge for us? So one of the suggestions that came out of this is that we might want to look at providing utilities with some guidance and some support by preparing a digital preparedness checklist that they could use to evaluate their own organizational readiness in terms of success factors. Next. One of those success factors, which has been mentioned earlier, is organizational culture. We need to strengthen our organizational culture so that they will better support learning and innovation. We can do, as was here today, talk about how corporate culture can either positively impact how it goes with implementation of a tool, or how it can really totally undermine it. We can also talk and learn from each other about tools that have been developed to measure organizational culture and to upgrade it. Next. You've also heard discussion about the importance of analyzing existing workflows and systems prior to implementing new digital tools. So we do have water professionals who are experienced with that and can talk about it, and that we can learn from, so that our conferences and other places where we get together can be places that we can learn about this. We also can learn from the experiences of utilities who failed to do that kind of mapping and then had to deal with the consequences during the course of implementation. Next. This is a huge issue, huge issue. One of the things that strikes me is that within organizations, within water utilities, normally you'll see operations people and IT people going forward together to implement a new digital tool. And at least the IT staff realize they're key to the project. But I would say that very often HR people don't actually even really grasp how integral their contributions really are to whether or not a utility will be successful in implementing new digital tools. So it ranges from issues like, are we going to be able to recruit the kind of positions that we're going to need to use this? Do we even have the job classifications that we're going to need to fully utilize this tool? Do we have the right requirements in our job classifications? Do we have union agreements that are going to make it hard for us to ask people to learn new skills? Are we good at staff training? Often the answer is no. Do we need to beef up our actual capacities? And how do we deal with staff accountability? There may be people who have been with the organization for some time and don't really agree with the necessity to continue to learn new things, or we may hire people who our recruitment hasn't been so great and they're not so prepared, so that we need to be able to hold them accountable as well as hold ourselves accountable. So part of what needs to happen is for us to look at pay levels, look at more analysis of the skills that are needed, and very significantly, and I think this would be a consequential body of work, is develop a strategic plan for how we're going to communicate with HR professionals about that. What we need from them. Is that going to be at our conferences? Are we going to need to go to their conferences? What I really feel clear about is that that's a really important conversation, and that on the whole, it's not sufficiently happening today. Next one. IT support, of course, is clear how important that is for it to be accessible, for us to be dealing with IT people who know not just about generic desktop applications, but about things that are specific to the water industry. We know that they need ongoing training, as was pointed out about cybersecurity, and we need guidance on how we can work together more effectively. Next. If I could take one of these PowerPoints and magnify it by about 100 to emphasize the importance of this, it's that we need to prioritize investments in staff training. In my experience in the water industry, there's a way that we're kind of in love with things. So that's machinery, that's equipment. There are people who I swear to God love valves. And it's, so that's where we then transfer that into the IT world. So we think if we get the right software, if we get the right hardware, we're going to be in business. And none of this stuff is magic. If people don't know how to use it, it won't be effectively used. And therefore, many digital projects actually essentially fail. So we need to look at what competencies will people need in different mission critical jobs to use these tools and address training barriers. One thing I'd also like to comment on is that there are some utilities who do really good work with staff training, innovative work, but that's certainly not the norm. A one-time PowerPoint presentation, there's a limit to what it's going to do. Something that's even worse is if you have a recording of a PowerPoint presentation. So we have some really pathetic training tools that we offer to people. So we need to learn from people who are advanced in this, both within our industry and within other industries, because training can be done much better than we today are normally doing it. And we need to bring that kind of investment into our training programs. Next. As has also been discussed, we need to help stakeholders develop qualified candidates. So we rely on high schools and community colleges and unions and other programs to prepare the candidates who we will recruit into our organization. But oftentimes their instructors don't have the information they need on what we're expecting workers in different kind of job categories to know. And the term general literacy is very broad, but the reality is that people in different mission critical trades need to be proficient in different kinds of tools, not necessarily a specific product, but different kinds of tools. And it's a responsibility I feel that we have as an industry to support these stakeholders in the development of new training materials. We need to look at whether our certification requirements need to be updated to include not just the idea of generic digital skills, but the digital skills that are relevant to that line of work. And very significantly, we need to provide opportunities for on-site learning. So it's a lesson learned for sure, but it's also an area that we need to bring our attention and our focus and our willingness to spend time to develop these programs for on-site learning. There's no way in the world that all our stakeholders are going to be able to make the investments in all these tools, which in any case are continually changing. So this is an area of active responsibility for us if we would like to get qualified candidates who know how to use them. Next. There's no question that we need to increase our industry understanding of what artificial intelligence and machine-assisted learning and collective intelligence are and what they mean for us and what they mean for the people we're employing in terms of how to best use their skills and combine it with analytical capabilities that can be provided through digital systems. This is an area where we need to learn from the examples of other industries because we are not a leader in this. So it's something where we need to move forward actively into our use of it and support of it, not in a way that we're just being dazzled by the magical possibilities, but where we really gear in and work toward making effective use of these tools. Next. I think, as was mentioned, that we have seen plenty of examples, both within utilities and at the national level and at the international level, about sure enough, we are at risk in ways that we haven't fully appreciated to date. One thing that I would like to mention specifically here, that one of the good examples that came in was that we need to become more open in talking with each other about the problems that we do have. This has really happened to utilities that they've had major problems, but the industry tends to want to talk about the feel-good stuff and the accomplishments. And I think we need industry messaging about the fact that we need to report incidents so that we can learn from each other about potential risks as well as how to address them. Next. So this again has just been a taste of what we've recommended in terms of future work but there will be Baywork in-person workshop on the digital worker in the spring of 2022. We don't have that program outlined yet, but what I'm sure of is that it's going to include an opportunity not just for presentations, but an opportunity for us to discuss among ourselves how we can work together collaboratively at a utility, regional, and national level. And I want to express my just very sincere and intense thanks for everybody who contributed this ideas to our idea box, because I think we're going to be continuing to come to it. I think of digital work as much like water quality in the sense that it's really is increasingly it's integral to what we do and how we do it. And we're going to get better as we go along, as we work together. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Cheryl. Now it's time for a question and answer segment that Robert Scott, the Baywork Vice President, will moderate for us. Robert?
Thanks everyone for your great presentations and sharing all these great ideas. And thanks for the attendees for being here and listening to all this great information. I do want to encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A and speak to us. I do have a question in the chat that was responded to, but I'll allow Dan to respond to it. The question, Dan Groves to respond to this. He responded in the chat, but we'll let him do that verbally as well. But the question came from Pamela, and she said, would you recommend having cybersecurity professionals at each plant? So Dan?
Yeah, great question. And I wish I had a more succinct answer to that, but it really is going to depend. And I listed a few factors in there. The complexity of your systems really drives the amount of cybersecurity needs. The size of those utilities. And then I mentioned the working relationship with your IT group, because many times, especially when it comes to sort of the SCADA side of the world, there's some benefit in finding a working relationship between your IT department and, let's call it, your operations technology group, which are the folks that are focused on SCADA. Because in general, in the past, operations technology folks typically did not have a lot of background and experience around cybersecurity. That's improving over time. So that working relationship between your IT and OT groups typically also will help drive how many professionals that you would need that are going to be assigned specifically to operations technology. So I wish I had a better answer, but my sense would be, and I'm not sure exactly which organization that you're with, but very large, very complex plants, that's a possibility that you could need one. But given the role of cybersecurity as an organizational task, it's generally something that you're going to want to be very well coordinated. So even if you had multiple people, you're going to want them all working together very, very closely, and then closely coordinated with your IT group, regardless of how many FTEs that you actually assign to it.
Thank you, Dan. I have a question for June regarding organizational culture. The question is, this is my question, June, by the way. What could an individual, just an employee, do to begin to impact the culture, at least the culture around them, so that our culture would be more amiable to digital tools?
Well, thank you for the question, Robert. I think, as I said before, leadership exists at every level. So I think what one individual can do in any group or any place in the organization is to help others. There is nothing more valuable than when you help someone, then you become invaluable to them. So as you see people working around you, you can observe their challenges or what they're struggling with. And you suggesting a solution and you providing some sort of an assistance, no matter how small or big it is, that's how you build that foundation of trust. And if someone trusts you that you have my best interest at heart, they'll listen to you more. And this goes true for also helping your managers, your supervisor, your boss. You see what they're dealing with. And oftentimes people are pretty upfront about what issues that they're having. So listen to them and see how you can help them. And you may not have the solution, but you might know someone who has a solution, and just connecting people, as simple as that, is a big, big assistance. And if you do that, people build trust. And when you suggest new ideas and changes, people are more receptive because they trust you. And this is something that I did, throughout my career, because I didn't start as a general manager, but that's what I did. I made it always about somebody else. What can I do to help? What can I do to help? And in doing that, your influence gets broader than just your own department or your group. And that kind of the word spreads, and everyone needs a little help. So they're very eager to come to you. And it's as simple as that as a beginning to take on some of these more progressive, innovative ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joan.
Thanks.
All right. We have a question here from Shelley, and she's asking, and this question will be for Elizabeth Toops with JBS. Is there a collaboration plan with Southern California Utilities, for example?
So, interesting you should ask. We're currently working with water and wastewater agencies in the Inland Empire. So that's San Bernardino and Riverside counties, for those of you who outside of California. And we currently have 5 signatories and are expanding the number of agencies that are we're partnering with almost every week. And the work is really, at this point, is really focused mostly on the Inland Empire. What I will say is that there have been discussions with Ventura County agencies, and actually Metropolitan Water which is the large provider in LA County, has been part of the Inland Empire work, in that they have activity in the Inland Empire as well. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, there's some work happening in Southern California. Our part of that work is really just now launching. So, but happy to provide more details. If you contact me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for your response. Here's a question from Brian, and then this will be directed to Dan Groves. It's a general question. How does regulatory agencies view impacts to air and water quality as a result of cyber attacks, assuming that a reasonable effort is made to make control systems resistant to routine attacks?
Wow, it's a great question. So I'll restate it just to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, which is, if an event occurs that causes some sort of regulatory violation, and then it's found out later that the root cause of that was a cyber attack. I think that's sort of the root of the question, if I'm following, and let me know if that's not the correct question that's being asked. So the truth be told, we don't have a lot of experience yet with, let's just say, for example, a wastewater spill that was caused by a cyber attack where that's actually pinpointed as the cause. Right now, of course, the regulatory agency that we're all, in the water wastewater sector is the EPA. They're very much focused on the physical aspects of regulation. And really, AWIA, or America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018, was one of the first times that cybersecurity was kind of put at the top of the list, that things that need to be evaluated as part of that that guidance. So I would say probably the most important thing would be, from an organization's perspective, is as you're working through your 2018 AWIA assessment, which is both the risk and resiliency assessment plus the emergency response plan, I think the key benefit of doing that is you're demonstrating due diligence by following voluntary consensus standards out there and then following through on the results of those plans. So a WIA requires you to assess the risk, plan to actually do something about those risks, and we'll put together what are called risk mitigation strategies, and then follow through on that. So I think that's, you know, from a defense perspective, as a utility that's being regulated, that would be my highest recommendation, to really to follow through on those WIA assessments, and then follow through to the best of your ability on the emergency response plans that you've developed. And that's what we understand that will be the EPA's approach to addressing it as these issues come up. One thing I will just note is that, you know, we work a lot with AWWA, specifically Kevin Morley, who's the Federal Relations Manager for the AWWA. And what we're really hearing is that we can expect more regulation that will be coming. So we anticipate that the regulation is going to become more direct, more specific, and the consequences for not following through that are going to be severe. But I think what you could make the assumption is that the 2018 America's Water Infrastructure Act is going to form the basis for any type of additional regulation that you might see coming forward. So I would just recommend pay very, very close attention and make sure you're on top of that to be able to, you know, really demonstrate the stewardship and the that's required in as this topic evolves.
Thank you, Dan. I have a question for Jim Cooper. You've provided an example of machine learning, and can you provide another example, real simple one perhaps, and I'm not on the spot a little bit, of how AI can assist us with just a real practical example?
Sure, absolutely. I'll give a real practical example. So in a water or wastewater treatment facility, you know, operators are typically adjusting controls for something like aeration, if you have a traditional conventional activated sludge, or something like chemical dosing, right? And even with the most elaborate and well-designed facility, your waste stream or your source water is constantly changing, right? And there's an opportunity to optimize your blower settings or your chemical dosing. Something like machine learning can process all of your data, identify what the right setting will be, and allow the operator, right, that's making the changes to see that, you know, he could make a minor change and maintain everything and perhaps save cost on energy or chemical. Now, one distinction I'd like to make briefly is that if we think about artificial intelligence, AI would do that on its own, right? And normally when we think about that, I mean, a bunch of red flags raised, right? We don't want some cloud-based AI to operate our facilities. But if AI and machine learning can provide a dashboard that tells the operator, hey, you can make this change and it's going to save, you know, so much chemical or so much energy cost over the next 8 hours of your shift. It's entirely up to the operator if they want to do that or not. But that's an example of when I talk about collective intelligence, you have a human in the loop. So at the end of the day, it's just a system that's I'll call it decision support, right? To help someone make a change. And really that's what it's all about. And again, what I tried to describe is it's not about replacing someone's job. It's not about having AI just automatically run everything. It's really about supporting the people that are there. And yeah, so that's one example. Many other ones out there as well. There's a lot of case studies out there. I recommend people attend conferences, look up the subject. Again, understand, learn. This is something that's not going away. So it's something that I recommend a slow understanding over time, not something that you're going to learn overnight as well, and then be an expert in that.
Thanks, Jim. I have a question for Ken Salmon. You mentioned that sometimes the wrong question is asked. And I'm wondering what could be done, or how could we advise employees to begin to think differently about new solutions, and instead of you guys having to figure out, okay, what is it you're trying to do, versus they already determined what device or digital tool would be the solution. How could we encourage our employees to be more think more about what you're trying to do versus a new thing that has caught their eye?
Well, thanks. It's a good question. So it feels like it's been an ongoing effort to get the business staff to try to just focus on what they need most importantly, and not think about how it would be developed. And I think they have to realize, it's been my experience, that if they do that, we're all successful together. And certainly IT should be in that mix to help them with requirements. And it'd be great to do with the agile, methodology, and look at vendors. But if we could just focus on what's needed in a new digital tool, new system, then up front. And someone said earlier, trying to think who it was, that going slow means going fast. That's in the planning stage, and that's where you want to force yourself to spend more time. And so it's just, those requirements are so all important. And we rarely see it. We really see that kind of focus. But if we can get there, like I said, it raises the possible success of the selection of the digital tool or implementation of it so much.
Thanks for that, Ken. No more questions at this time, Catherine. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. Can you go to the next slide? There is a link in your chat for a survey for this webinar. Please fill it out. You will also receive an email after the webinar with the link to the survey. This is valuable information for us to continually improve our offerings to all of you. So thank you all very much. This concludes our webinar on the digital worker using tools to deliver water services. Thanks to all of our presenters. Thanks to Robert, Scott, and Michael Kushner for your support before and during the webinar. The webinar will be posted to our BayWork website in a week or two, and Michael did post the link to the white paper in the chat, and you can find that on our homepage. We will be going to the Utility Management Conference in August in Atlanta. Cheryl and I will speak on the digital worker, and Michael and Robert will speak on BayWork. So for anybody who's there, please do approach us, introduce yourself. We're building a learning community. So thank you for your support. Thank you for everything, and have a wonderful day.